Everyone knows her face. It appears at movie premieres, fashion shows, award ceremonies. Cameras follow her movements. Articles describe what she wears, what she says, how she stands. And yet, very little about her actual life feels exposed. For someone who has grown up in public, Zendaya has remained unusually controlled. She doesn't overshare. She doesn't explain herself often. She doesn't invite people in unless she chooses to. That alone makes her different. Because the usual pattern is simple. People who become famous young lose privacy early, then spend the rest of their lives trying to get it back. Zendaya never seemed to lose it in the first place. To understand how that happened, the story doesn't start on a red carpet. It starts before the cameras cared. This is an English shadowing exercise. To get value from it, you must practice, not just listen. Listen carefully. Pause when needed. Repeat each sentence out loud. The sentences in this story are kept simple and clear, so they're easier to follow and shadow as you listen. Don't stress about being perfect. Progress comes from repetition, not perfection. Let's begin. Before fame, before Disney, before the world learned her name, Zendaya was a kid growing up in Oakland, California. Not Hollywood. Not Los Angeles celebrity culture. Oakland. She lived in a city where people worked regular jobs, showed up for responsibilities, and didn't treat creativity as something magical. It was something you practiced. Her mother was a teacher and deeply involved in theater. Her father came from a background built on discipline and physical training. Between them, Zendaya grew up around two strong ideas. Self-expression mattered, but effort mattered more. Art was normal in her house. So was structure. As a child, Zendaya spent time in theaters not as a performer being praised, but as someone watching how things worked. She saw rehearsals drag on. She saw mistakes corrected. She saw people repeat scenes until they felt natural. Performance didn't feel mysterious to her. It felt procedural. She attended the Oakland School for the Arts, a place that didn't treat creativity like a dream. Students were expected to train seriously. Acting, dance, and performance were approached like skills, something you sharpen, not something you wait to be discovered for. Zendaya studied there during the day. After school, she danced with a hip-hop group. Rehearsals were long. Movements were repeated. Performances happened in small venues, not glamorous stages. There was no audience cheering her name, just routine. That repetition shaped how she approached work later. When something becomes normal early, it loses its power to overwhelm you. Before television, Zendaya worked as a child model and appeared in advertisements. These weren't life-changing moments, but they introduced her to professional environments early. She learned how long days could feel. She learned how adults behaved under pressure. She learned how to stay focused even when attention drifted. Most importantly, she learned that cameras weren't personal. They were tools. That distance stayed with her. In 2010, everything shifted. Zendaya was cast in the Disney Channel series Shake It Up. She played Rocky Blue, a disciplined dancer who took her craft seriously. The show became popular quickly, and Zendaya's face became familiar to millions of people almost overnight. Fame arrived fast, and with it came rules. Disney fame isn't loose or chaotic. It's controlled. Contracts decide behavior. Interviews follow approved paths. Image is monitored. Mistakes carry weight. Zendaya entered that system young. Younger than most people are when they understand how permanent public attention can be. While other teenagers learned through private mistakes, hers happened under observation. She adjusted, not by rebelling, not by disappearing, by becoming careful. During those years, her life ran on two tracks. On screen, she was scheduled, managed, visible. Off screen, she stayed close to family, kept training, and avoided situations that pulled her into noise she didn't want. She didn't chase controversy. She didn't push for shock value. She didn't rush into adulthood for attention. People often assume that early fame makes someone louder. In her case, it narrowed her focus. She became quieter, more deliberate, more selective. While Shake It Up was still running, Zendaya paid attention to what happened to people who left similar shows. Some vanished quickly. Some struggled publicly. Some tried to break their image overnight and lost balance. She noticed patterns. By the time the show ended, Zendaya didn't announce a transformation. She didn't explain her next move. She didn't rush toward visibility. She waited, not because she lacked direction, but because she understood that time itself was part of the story. And that pause would shape everything that came next. Fame doesn't arrive gently. It doesn't ask whether you're ready. It doesn't slow down to match your age. Once it starts, it keeps moving, and the person inside it has to adapt or break. When Shake It Up ended, Zendaya was still young, but her face already belonged to the public. People had opinions about who she was supposed to be, even though they had never met her. That's the strange part of early fame. You grow up, but the image stays frozen. After Disney, there was an expectation that she would either disappear or reinvent herself loudly. That's usually how the transition goes. Some former child stars chase distance from their past by doing the opposite of what made them famous. Zendaya didn't. She didn't reject where she came from, and she didn't lean into it either. Instead, she slowed the pace. That decision wasn't dramatic, but it was risky. In entertainment, slowing down can look like losing relevance. Offers stop coming. Attention moves elsewhere. People forget quickly. Zendaya accepted that risk. Her next major project wasn't designed to shock anyone. KC Undercover still lived inside the Disney system, but it gave her something new: control. She wasn't just acting anymore. She became involved behind the scenes as a producer. That changed how she experienced the work. She had a say in how her character behaved, how intelligence was shown on screen, and how a young woman was presented. The role was quieter, more thoughtful, less performative. To most viewers, it didn't look like a big move. To her, it was. At the same time, her personal life became more guarded. Zendaya didn't share much publicly. She avoided oversharing online. She didn't use controversy to stay visible. She didn't explain herself when people misunderstood her. That silence wasn't accidental. It was protection. Growing up famous means mistakes don't disappear. They live online. They get replayed. They follow you. Zendaya seemed to understand that early and decided not to give the internet much to hold on to. Still, attention found her. Fashion became one of the spaces where people noticed her most. Red carpets turned into moments people analyzed closely. Some praised her choices, others criticized them. At times, the reactions were harsh. Instead of responding defensively, Zendaya stayed composed. She didn't argue. She didn't retreat. She didn't explain. She let her presence speak. There were moments when public discussion crossed into something heavier. Questions about her appearance, comments about her body, judgments about her maturity. These weren't isolated incidents. They were reminders of how closely young women in the spotlight are examined. Zendaya didn't turn those moments into speeches. She absorbed them quietly, and then she moved forward. Behind the scenes, she kept working on craft, reading scripts, studying performances, paying attention to what kind of stories felt honest to her. She wasn't looking for visibility. She was looking for something that would demand more of her. As the years passed, the industry's tone around her shifted. She wasn't just a former child star anymore. She was someone people waited for. Someone who didn't show up often, but when she did, it meant something. That reputation wasn't built through constant work. It was built through absence, through patience, through restraint. Eventually, a role appeared that didn't offer safety. It offered exposure. It offered risk. And it asked her to let go of the careful distance she had built. That role would change how the public saw her and how she saw herself. For a long time, Zendaya lived in a strange middle space. She was famous, but not loud. Respected, but not fully trusted as an adult actor. Visible, but still carefully protected by her earlier image. That balance couldn't last forever. At some point, she would either stay safe or take a risk. The role that forced that decision came from a place she didn't expect. When Zendaya was offered the part of Rue in Euphoria, the show wasn't framed as a career move. It was framed as a challenge. The character was messy, emotionally unstable, addicted, and often unlikable. There was nothing safe about it. In interviews later, Zendaya admitted she didn't immediately say yes. She read the script carefully. She thought about how it would change how people saw her. She thought about whether she was ready to carry something that heavy. She was still young, and Rue wasn't forgiving. Zendaya didn't just act in Euphoria. She became an executive producer on the show, the youngest to do so in that role. That meant she wasn't only responsible for performance, but also for shaping how the story treated its characters. She spoke openly about that responsibility. In interviews, she explained that she wanted the show to avoid glamorizing addiction. She didn't want Rue to look cool. She wanted the struggle to feel uncomfortable, repetitive, and exhausting because that's what it actually is. That choice shaped how the character was written. To prepare for the role, Zendaya isolated herself emotionally. She talked about how filming Euphoria required her to stay in a heavy mental space for long periods of time. Some days, she went home emotionally drained. Other days, she needed distance from everything else just to reset. She also said she was very aware of the impact the show would have on young viewers, and that awareness stayed with her throughout filming. This wasn't a role she could switch off easily. When Euphoria aired, the reaction was immediate. The show was discussed everywhere, not just for its visuals or shock value, but for the realism of its performances. Zendaya's portrayal of Rue stood out quickly. Critics pointed to how controlled her acting was, how she didn't overplay emotion, how silence often did more than dialogue. People who had never watched her Disney work saw her for the first time, and the conversation shifted. In 2020, Zendaya won the Emmy Award for Lead Actress in a Drama Series. She became the youngest person ever to win in that category. She didn't celebrate loudly. In her acceptance speech, she focused on gratitude and responsibility. She talked about hope. She talked about representation. She avoided turning the moment into a victory lap. Later, she admitted that awards didn't change how she worked. They didn't make the process easier. They just made expectations heavier. Around the same time, Zendaya's presence expanded in another direction. She was cast as MJ in the Spider-Man films, a role that placed her inside one of the biggest franchises in the world. Unlike typical blockbuster characters, her version of MJ was quiet, observant, and emotionally grounded. Zendaya once mentioned in interviews that she appreciated how the character wasn't written to be flashy. She liked that MJ felt like a real person, someone watching the world instead of performing for it. That preference said a lot about how she chose roles. Behind the scenes, Zendaya's lifestyle stayed surprisingly simple. For years, she lived with her parents even while working on major projects. She talked openly about how staying close to family helped keep her grounded. Fame hadn't pushed her into isolation or excess. She didn't rush independence for appearance. She chose stability instead. Her fashion presence also became more intentional during this period. Zendaya worked closely with stylist Law Roach, forming a creative partnership rather than a typical client relationship. Together, they treated fashion as storytelling, choosing looks based on meaning, history, and message rather than trends. In interviews, Zendaya explained that fashion gave her control over how she was seen without needing to speak. It became another language. In 2022, she won her second Emmy for Euphoria. Again, she didn't dramatize the moment. By then, the pattern was clear. Zendaya wasn't chasing milestones. She was building something quieter and more durable. At this point in her life, Zendaya doesn't live the way people expect someone at her level to live. There are no constant paparazzi photos of wild nights or public chaos. No dramatic reinventions every year. No rush to prove relevance. Instead, there's distance. That distance isn't accidental. It's something she actively protects. In interviews, Zendaya has spoken about how important it was for her to stay close to family, especially as her career grew larger. For a long time, even while working on major projects, she continued living with her parents. Not because she couldn't afford independence, because she didn't want isolation. She has said that staying grounded in familiar routines helped her keep perspective, especially in an industry that often disconnects people from normal life. That choice stood out quietly. Most young celebrities move away from home as soon as they can. Zendaya moved slowly instead. Her relationship with fame has always been cautious. She doesn't post constantly. She doesn't document her private life in detail. She rarely explains her decisions publicly. When she does interviews, she's thoughtful but controlled. She once mentioned that growing up in the public eye taught her how permanent digital moments are. That awareness made her careful about what she shares and what she keeps to herself. Privacy, for her, isn't mystery. It's boundaries. Romantic relationships have been treated the same way. Zendaya has never built her public image around who she dates. When attention increases, she pulls back. She avoids turning personal relationships into content. In interviews, she has said that keeping parts of her life private allows those parts to stay real. That decision often frustrates people who want access. She accepts that fashion remains one of the few places where she allows visibility without explanation. Her long-term collaboration with stylist Law Roach has been widely discussed, not because of trends, but because of intention. They don't dress for shock value. They dress with references old Hollywood, archival fashion, cultural moments. Zendaya has said that fashion allows her to express confidence without having to speak. It's controlled exposure. She decides what people see. Even there, she avoids access. She shows up. She delivers. She disappears again. Work habits follow the same pattern. Zendaya doesn't take many projects at once. She has spoken about reading scripts carefully and turning down roles that don't feel right, even when they come with big names or big paychecks. She's mentioned in interviews that saying no early in her career was difficult but necessary. Taking everything would have meant losing control of her time, her energy, and eventually her interest in the work itself. Burnout, she has said, isn't dramatic. It's gradual. She avoids it by leaving space. Even success is treated carefully. Awards don't seem to change how she moves. After winning multiple Emmys, she didn't announce a new phase or pivot aggressively. She continued working at the same pace. When asked about pressure after winning, she admitted that recognition adds weight rather than relief. Expectations rise. Attention sharpens. Mistakes feel louder. That awareness didn't push her to retreat. It pushed her to stay disciplined. What's most noticeable now is what isn't there. No public spirals. No rushed transformations. No constant self-reinvention. Zendaya doesn't behave like someone trying to outrun time. She behaves like someone willing to let it pass. Her story doesn't end with a conclusion. There's no final lesson. No moment where everything clicks into place. She's still young, still working, still choosing carefully. And that's part of what makes her story interesting. Not that she became famous, but that she grew up famous and didn't let that become the loudest thing about her.